So here we're continuing to implement our iOS app for picking 6 lucky numbers, our lucky lotto picker. So in the first video, we set up all the UI kit controls, the buttons and the segmented control and the labels and whatnot. We did that in Interface Builder in Xcode, which all got placed, serialized and placed into a nib file. So those were our view objects. And then in the second video, we created the actual engine for picking lucky numbers. So we're using the model view controller software design pattern. So in the first video, we laid out some of our view objects. These are the objects that the user sees and interacts with. In the second video, we created a object that is our lucky number picker engine. So we did that. And so in this video, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to hook the controller to the view objects so that the view objects can talk to the controller and the controller can reference the view object. These will be called, we'll be using what are called outlets and actions to do this. So I'm going to go back, so we'll go back into Xcode and I'm going to bring up the nib file, which will bring up the Interface Builder tool, and then I'm going to go click on the icon over here in the upper right that has the little tuxedo on it. I call this tuxedo mode. It brings up the assistant editor, and what you'll notice is it splits my editor screen. On the left, I've got the view of Interface Builder, and on the right, I have the corresponding header file for the controller. So if you actually look at the controller, if you look at the class inspector and I actually click on files owner, you can see, so these files owners are actually placeholders for hooks, and you can see that the actual files owner is an actual controller. So this files owner will actually be a reference to the actual lotto view controller instance that gets loaded from the nib file. So what I'm going to do here though is I'm going to, in my controller, I'm going to start by creating hooks to my various objects. And I'm going to show you how to do this. So first of all, as I'm going to go over and on my first button, what I want to do is create what's called an outlet. And I'll just show you one way to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the control key down and I'm on this, and I'm going to control drag from that button over into just below the end on my interface. And when I release, I get a little menu, and I can pick up. So then, and you can see there's a couple. There's going to be outlets and actions. We want an outlet, and the type of the outlet's going to be a UI button, and it's going to have it's going to be a weak reference. I'll explain that in a minute. But I'm just going to call this reference button 1. Right? So I hit return, and notice what that does is it generates a property called button 1. It's a UI button, and it's designed to be an outlet that references my first button. So this keyword IB outlet is a keyword that the Interface Builder tool recognizes, so it knows that this is indeed what's called an outlet. So so it created a property that's an outlet. So when the nib file actually gets deserialized and all the objects get loaded, this reference will end up pointing or referencing my first button. So I'll be able to access my first button. So first of all, you'll see that the semantics for this is it's merely a weak reference. Since this button's already owned by its super view, there's no need for me to have my controller to have extra ownership of it, so it's not going to go away. And since it's non-threaded, again, non-atomic is fine. So you'll notice too, since it's there's a little circle to the left that's filled, right? And you notice when I hover over it, you can see the corresponding button highlights, and so that tells me where the reference is. As a matter of fact, if I go right-click on the button, I can also see it there, that it's hooked up there. All right. So let's go and create another outlet. I'll do the same thing again, just to see. So I'm now going to create another outlet from my second button. So I'm going to hold the control. I'm going to begin on the button. I'm going to control drag over into this particular section, and I'm going to create. This is going to be button 2. So there, I've created yet another outlet. So by just control dragging over there, that's one way to create these outlets. Another way to do this is if I just right-click on the button, you'll notice you get a whole menu, and I look under referencing outlets. What I can do is I can drag from there, and I can drag over to there and create an outlet that way too. So I'll call this button 3, and so I can create outlets that way as well. I'll let you notice that in the interface builder, you sort of have two different views of the elements in your nib file. You have this hierarchical view, and I can also control drag from that as well. So for button 4, I'll control drag from the hierarchical view, and I'll go over and do that as well. And I'll call this, this will be button 4. Go ahead and connect that. I'll control drag for, oops, undo. Always remember Apple Z when you undo. So let's go ahead and create the outlet for the other button. So this is going to be button 5, and I'm going to create an outlet for button 6 again. We'll call this button 6. All right, so now I've got outlets for my 6 buttons, so I can access those. I'm also going to need an outlet for my segmented control, right? So if I see my segmented control, here I'm going to do a control drag from my segmented control over to here, and I'll call this my max number segmented control. So now I've got an outlet for those. So when the nib file is actually loaded and these objects are deserialized in the nib file, these buttons and these controls are deserialized from the nib file, these references will automatically be connected here. So now my controller can actually directly link to these. Now I'm not going to make, I don't need any outlets for anything else. I don't need an outlet for this button because I'm only going to be responding to button clicks on that case. So there's how we create outlets. So the next thing we need to do is create a similar thing, what are called actions. So I want to define methods that are corresponding to actions when buttons are touched or when segmented control values change. So I'm going to start by creating an action for our first button. So I'm going to do a very similar thing. I'm going to control drag over, and this time for the connection, instead of doing outlet, I'm going to choose action. And I'm going to give this a name. I'll call the name. This is going to be the name of a method. I'll call it button touched. And I know in this case that the type of the sender says is ID, but I know in this particular case that it's always going to be a UI button. So I'm going to, the event is actually touch up inside. So when the user releases their finger and it's still inside the bounds, the frame of the button, it'll actually trigger this event. All right, so I'll go ahead and say connect. So now notice what I have is a method called button touched : right? And with an argument of sender. So whenever this button is touched, this method will be invoked. And sender will actually be the object that triggered the action. And my controller will be the target. Now actually I want all my buttons to actually be tied to the same action. So I'll do a similar sort of thing. So you notice if I right click on that button, you'll see that I already have touch up inside is connected. Well, I'm going to do a similar thing for these other buttons here. If I right click on this, I'm also, let's see, I can find that touch up inside. I can do it this way. So I want to go, actually the same methods invoked that way. So that's another way to actually hook up the action. So I'm going to do the other ones by just doing control drags to the action. So I want all 6 of my buttons invoking that method. Okay, so that's pretty simple. All right, so now all 6 of my buttons will call that method whenever they're touched. I'm also going to want an action when the pick button is touched. So I'm going to control drag from that, and we'll call this, again, I'm going to choose this to be an action, and the type is going to happen on UI, the type of the sender is going to be UI button, and I'm going to pick the name to be, I'll just call it pick. All right, so now I've got a method whenever the big pick button is set, and I'm also going to want a method to be invoked whenever the segmented control changes. So I'm going to do a control drag from the segmented control, and I'm going to call this max value changed. So whenever that changes, oh wait, oops, I forgot to mention. Let me cancel that. I want this to be an action. Let's try that again. So I'm going to control drag over here. I forgot to say it. This is an action. I want it whenever the values change. Okay, there we go. We can actually change the type of the sender from the generic ID type to UI segmented control, and I'm going to call it max value changed and connect. All right, so now I've got methods that'll be invoked when those are changed. All right, so that's it for hooking up my outlets and my actions. And so now we've got the proper hooks between our controls and our view controller. So now let's go back and get rid of the assistant editor and go back and look at the implementation. So you're going to see, so you see if I look at the header file, I can see that what we saw already is still there. But if I look in the implementation, you can see that there are already stubs now for our various methods. Now, so just sort of to demonstrate that these methods are actually getting invoked, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an NSLog message and for each one of these, so that when these events occur, we're just going to log the fact that it occurred, and then we'll look in the console and we'll see this actually happens. So this is a good proof of concept to show that these events are indeed getting triggered. So, and then add one more NSLog message for each of our actions. Here we go. All right. So what I'm going to do is if I'm going to bring up the console, I can see the console here. All right. So if I choose to see the console by clicking on the proper button up here in the upper right, I can see the console will appear. Make this a little bit bigger. And what I'm going to do is now run my application in the simulator. So I'm going to bring up the simulator, and let's go ahead and close that for now. And let's go ahead and run this in the simulator. So I'm going to go ahead and build and run. Looks like no problems. So we bring up the simulator, and so let's sort of click on our buttons here. So I click on the one, and sure enough, you can see down here in the console that my button touched got triggered. So let's make sure each one of my 6 buttons seems like it's getting triggered. And we also notice, oh, okay, good. So whenever the segmented control changes, the max value change method is getting invoked. And what about the big pick button? All right, great. So whenever the big pick button, right? So now we can have quite a bit of confidence that these hooks are made and are working. All right. So we'll stop right there, and the next thing we'll do is in the next video is we'll actually do something in the bodies of these things so that the logic actually does what we want. So we'll end with that video right there.